Welcome to Caffeinated Mornings, a show built around the idea of more conversation and less presentation. We dive deeper into discussions that go beyond the surface of the work. A big thank you to our sponsors who make this show possible. Today's episode is brought to you by the award-winning, strategically driven, independent, full-service agency TDA Boulder. And we can't forget Buck Ross Productions and Coop Studios for helping us capture and share this show with you. A special thanks to The Coffee Ride for keeping us caffeinated, and to Realtor Michelle Sander and the Zeal Group at RE/MAX, CMCI Studio, Snappy Little Numbers for our theme music, and Pro Photo Rental for their continued support. In this episode, we join everyone's favorite designer and host, Jay Farrakane, for an insightful conversation with Shun-Luoi Fong, founder and CEO of the design and innovation firm Forge. In this talk, we chat about how his mantra of listen, learn, love, and create has shaped his revolutionary approach to relationship-centered design, in addition to the importance of challenging ideas and how becoming a deeper human benefits the work we do. So, get comfortable, get caffeinated, and get ready to be inspired and informed with our newest friend, Shun-Luoi Fong. Let's go.
We first met at Colorado Ad Day. You remember this?
Yeah.
And you were doing
sitting on the floor.
Yeah, I was like Indian.
Room.
I was like sitting on the floor. I felt like a little kid in like third grade. Like, we had a visiting.
Listen, my son.
Yes, exactly. We had a visiting celebrity. It was really great because I remember, and I was recalling this as we were getting set up for this. The tangent was, and why I became intrigued is you started talking about this notion of someone asked you a question about delivering strategy, and it was really interesting because you mentioned this fact that strategies don't always have to be delivered in a deck. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, oh, this dude's smart. I really got to talk to him. So I reached out, and this is the lesson learned for our community here. You live in a fantastic place and a fantastic time that you could reach out to awesome human beings, like anyone in your industry that you admire, and potentially connect with them through Instagram or just walking up and meeting them. So I was that discussion led into so much more. We met for coffee and faculty now and all this stuff. And in the lead up to this, a lot of people kept saying, who's the next guest? And I was like, oh, it's Shun-Luoi. And they're like, oh, that's a super cool name. What's he do? And I'm like, I'm kind of hesitant to tell people what you do. And so like, I'm going to leave it to you. Like, how do you title yourself? Do you give us a little rundown on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say, I love having like deep conversations with people. And my students know this, like sometimes I talk a little bit too much, but I have not been this excited for a conversation as much as I am for this one. I don't know if that made sense. I'm super stoked for this. Thanks for having me. Excited to sit down with you. The other thing that I'll mention is I think you're the third person in my life who has called me Shun.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this bad or good?
It's not bad or good.
Okay.
The thing is I know you don't know my family when you call me Shun because so I have 7 siblings and all of our middle names begin with Shun. So Shun-Luoi is my middle name.
Yes.
So if you're around my family and you say, hey, Shun, I mean, everyone's gonna look over, right? So anyway, it's totally cool you call me Shun. It's just not many people do. So what do I call myself? It's a great question, and one that I've like. There's always been this like tension in me of like I'm a lot of things, right? And then that's not very helpful for people because it's kind of confusing.
Right. People want to label so they know where to.
Yeah.
Where do I park this guy?
So I think what I've started to call myself recently when I'm talking to people, especially like in a professional or creative kind of context, is that I'm a strategy and creative sparring partner. And what I mean by that is that I love coming alongside people, getting into the trenches with them, and sparring with them. I think you think about some of the greatest boxers in history, right? Muhammad Ali, right? Muhammad Ali is not who he is without an amazing sparring partner or multiple sparring partners. And some of those sparring partners went on to have great boxing careers themselves, right? But I think when people are successful, when they're flourishing, when they're accomplishing their goals, they almost always have someone in their life that is a sparring partner. And I'm in a season of my life where I just love coming alongside people and playing that role and helping contribute to their success and their flourishing by sparring with them on a day-to-day basis.
So you're a cocktail party.
Yeah.
will you like kind of take someone down with the, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a sparring partner. And then there's like, oh gosh, we're strapping in. We know we're going to get into it. Because your background, you grew up, you mentioned having 7 siblings.
Yeah.
Family was educators. So University of Nebraska?
So my dad was at Creighton University
Creighton.
in Omaha. Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because, like, if I think about, you know, we both teach, we both come from backgrounds where critique was like a big part of, at least in my formative years, I was like how I learned a lot about like what's good, what's bad. Most importantly, it had like a formality to it, critique, when I'm talking about that. Like, you know, you got up and you were forced to listen in a way. And for me, it was actually, I was acting like I was listening while I was bearing like hurt and anger, like way down inside as I was being reviewed. But critiques, I also realized at some point were a test, and more that the notion of you could counter thinking, right? And reason. And you used a word at that day talk where, you know, this notion of like sparring. I think that was another thing that really intrigued me. As we get more into the sparring thing, like, you know, bringing it back to the notion of critique and where the benefit that comes out of it, is that where you kind of learned it? Like, was it from more of that, your design background? Because you started out as an electrical engineer. You're not a traditionally trained designer.
I'm one of those people that I like to call myself completely unemployable because I've done so many things in my career.
Right.
And you know, when I look back on my career, and Steve Jobs, you know, once talked about it. It's like you can't connect the dots by looking forward. You can only really connect them by looking backward.
Right.
And that's really been the case for me. I look back on my life and all the things I've done, and there's been, you know, there's the phrase, a 3-chord strand is not easily broken. And I see like 3 chords in my life that have kind of always interwoven. It hasn't always been by intention or on purpose. Sometimes just like looking back, I'm like, oh, wow, that's always been a part of my life. Like
Right.
for me, whether it was, I actually never worked as an electrical engineer. I graduated, I'm like, I'm never doing this. Moved out to San Francisco during the .com. And so I was a developer for a little bit.
That was actually a common leap over, though. EEs, for some reason, became developers a lot of times. At least in my experience in the Bay Area.
Certainly back, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a easy leap into the software space as a developer. But through all those years, like I was a developer, I was a web designer and developer back in the early 2000s when you could like be considered pretty good at both of those.
Yeah.
So I was doing both of those. I worked as a photographer and filmmaker, worked with nonprofits, worked with for-profits. I started my own company. So I've done a lot of things.
And agency stuff, too,
And
right?
agency
Account?
stuff.
Yeah.
Like the past few years, I've been more on the ad agency side of things. So I've done a lot. Lived overseas, multiple places here in the United States. And the threads for me have always been 3 threads, right? One is just like strategy. Strategy's always been a part of my life.
Right.
And that could certainly be unpacked a little bit. But the other one is creativity. And I use that term pretty broadly. Like my philosophy is like everyone in this room is creative
by some way,
right?
yeah.
We're all created creative, and we are creative in different ways. And so what I love is just tackling tough problems and having to be creative to help solve those problems. The third one for me is just shared human experience or human connection. Like that's always been a part of what I've done. And so, you know, when I look back of like, what are all the things that informed, you know, that sparring, that thinking critically and working with others, it's like, it's kind of all of it, right? Like they all played a role in shaping me. But even going back to my family, you know, 7 kids, both my parents were professors. Our home was a very dynamic environment of like debate,
Just the
conversation.
human numbers in that room.
Yeah. Our dinner table was like, everything was fair game. Sometimes kind of awkward, like the kinds of topics that would come up, but it was all fair game. And I always used to like half joke that in our family, like if you didn't have an opinion, you formed one really quickly, right? Because it's like, if you can't run with the big dog, stay on the porch. Like, so in my family, it's like, if you wanted to kind of have a seat at the table, so to speak, you had to be willing to jump into the fray, but not in a way that it was just like thoughtless. Like we were all intelligent human beings, rational human beings that could think well and ask good questions. So that was at its kind of some of the formative years for me was at the dinner table with my family and just debating and talking through different topics and things like that.
Well, it's interesting too. Is I too, I think I'm at a point in my design career where now I'm figuring out the why and why I do what I do and where it all came from. And you know, like one of the things your mantra of listen, learn, love, create, it was something that was really interesting to me because like I could see those being formed, particularly in a dynamic household where there's a lot of intellect and that kind of stuff. But it points to a thing where you start to kind of like, there's an empathy or something that's being even implied in that. Is that something that you recently came to that you're like, okay, cool, these are the kind of 4 pillars I'm gonna start to organize this against, and then, drawing down from that? Because like, I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about when you started talking. There's always this nod to the human connection part of it. The do I care about you? Am I really paying attention? And so like, can you unpack a little bit about how that shows up in like your work, this mantra of listen, learn, love, create?
Yeah. So to kind of start back some of those formative years for me. So in my family, like we were really good at debating, and talking and just like wrestling with things. But I was number 5 out of 8. And I was like the stereotypical 5th child. So I was like...
There's no stereotypical 5th child, by the way.
Oh, middle child.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay, middle. I can
Doesn't
understand.
everyone have 8 kids? Come on,
well,
man.
You're a classic 5th child,
Middle child is what I meant there. Yeah, so I was the stereotypical middle child where I was kind of like lost in the middle, pretty quiet. So didn't have, my older siblings kind of dominated the conversation. So oftentimes my kind of approach was just like kind of sit quietly and just kind of hang out and listen and learn, et cetera. But I think out of that though, like I didn't necessarily like that. Like I didn't like feeling like I was kind of lost in the conversation. And so I think that developed in me kind of an empathy for others of like, you can go into a room and you see people, they're like, oh, that person over there, they're not sure what to do, right? They just feel a little lost, especially when there's a lot of people. So I think that just developed for me an empathy for others, that have valuable perspectives, that have their own stories, that want to feel a sense of belonging and to be a part of it. And so I think that's what really led kind of toward this mantra for me of listen, learn, love, create, is that in my family, for a long time, it took me and my siblings a long time to learn to listen well. Like we were really good at debating, right? and like just jumping into it, but we weren't necessarily great at being like, hey, what do you think? And taking time to listen without just waiting for them to stop talking so that they could respond, right? And get your word in. So that's where a lot of that grew, was just, knowing that everyone has a powerful perspective and a powerful story. Everyone's creative. And so that's what led to me of like, look, if I want to get to know people, I want to do really creative work, great collaborative work. Like I have to take the time to listen to those around me. And some of that's human-centered design, relationship-centered design, which we can talk more about, but like I have to take the time to listen. And kind of implicit in that is like learning to ask good questions, which was for me like a really key part of my growth. Is like I was pretty shy when I was a kid. You might not feel like you're like, no way. A successful day, my freshman year of high school, a successful day for me was like, if no one talks to me, that's a win. Because I was just like so shy and stuff like that. And somehow I broke out of that. But
you're biding your time. Now
biding my time, yeah. I'm making up for lost time, right? But I learned like that. I'm not sure where I was going with that, but the story and the perspective that I had that others have, and if I want to be able to collaborate with them, do great work with them, serve them, help them, like I've got to take the time to listen.
Yeah,
right.
Completely.
And ask good questions, right? And then. But not just that, like I mentioned before, like sometimes we listen just waiting for them to be quiet so we can say our thing, right? Get your word in, right? So it's like you have to take time to listen and actually truly learn, right? And if you learn about that person, and you can only do that by asking good questions and by listening, then you're in a better position to understand how can I best love this person, right? And this is true like in personal relationships. This is true in business, in creativity and design, like human-centered design. Like, hey, I'm trying to create a solution for people. Like, I'm going to be able to create a much better solution for them if I take the time to listen, to learn, and get to a point where I can truly love them, right? And then I can create.
Well, I think there's a funny thing, and as we're on the topic of like, the listen, particularly in this mantra, I realized that listening was like a super hack in some weird way, and this shows like my stubbornness in especially my younger days in design. It's like I would like leave a meeting and not having heard a thing. And I'm like, why is this so fucking hard? But when you listen, you're like, oh shit, they gave it all to me too. There's like a superpower in that. And it's funny because like it is the first word in your mantra. Is it the most important of the four? The listen? Is there anyone that outranks in listen, learn, love, create? Is there any that is like, is that the priority?
I don't know that any one is the priority because I think they all go together. Right? Like it'd be easy for me to say like love, like
Right.
right. Greatest thing
Could
is
be the
love.
day, too,
All you need
right?
is love, right? Like, and it's true, but I think again, you can have conversation around what love means. But I think our ability to love other people, if we're too busy, just thinking about ourselves, then we're not really in a position to love people. And so I think the listening and the learning has to go with that, needs to go with that.
Yeah.
So they all go together
Well, and
for me.
there is this notion of you said in the lead up to this that the if someone wants to become a better designer, strategist, creative, first they need to become a deeper human, right? And if you look at most designers, I actually saw someone had this. It was pretty beautiful. It was talking about like in a year structure of what it looked like to be a designer, and when you're in your beginning years. You have all these great ideas, but you don't really know how to manifest them yet, right? Yeah. So you struggle with that. And then once you master the tools for manifestation, then you move on to these different periods, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually even think a lot of the designers and people I respect in brand building and creativity like you, they're very diverse human beings, right? And maybe there's a hack in that as well too, right? This is what always cracks me up. I asked you first thing, how do you title yourself? And if we look at a lot of design practices, right? Like people, I'm hiring UX person. I'm hiring a UX for finance. Like it gets pretty slivered, right? But I think that if we come back to design, big D, you want as many areas to draw from as possible. So when you said that thing, to first that someone needs to become a deeper human to be a better whatever they want to do, right? Architect, plumber, name it. How do you get there? What are some of the steps that you can kind of like? What does it mean to become a deeper human? And is it building on some of these practices?
It is building on some of these practices. And this ties into the relationship-centered design, and that we can maybe dive into a little bit more. But like we as individual human beings, we're in multiple kinds of relationships, and so relationship is like very much at the core of me becoming a deeper human being. I can't do it in a silo by myself, right? And so...
And you do run a very collaborative thing, even in the lead up on things that we've talked about, outside of talks in school and stuff, that I love that you invite people in. It's like your fuel, so.
Yeah, and I think, I think becoming a deeper human being, you have to ask deeper questions, going back to the question aspect. Yep. But I think another aspect of becoming a deeper human being is... moose, right? All right. Let me explain what I mean by that.
Okay.
Right. So my daughter, who's in the audience, which is pretty cool that she came here today. She went to a youth retreat a couple years ago, and when you go to a youth retreat, you're doing all sorts of stuff. You're getting tired, right? You're worn out. You're having a lot of fun. Well, they had the opportunity. This was up, I think, past Winter Park, and they had the opportunity to wake up really early one morning and go on a hike. And she's like, man, that's the last thing I want to do. I'm so tired. It's cold outside. I just want to stay in my bed and sleep. But she had this very insightful moment. And I don't remember if it was like the night before, if it was like that morning of like, I'm trying to drag myself out of bed. But she said to herself, she's like, there might be a moose out there, right? And if I don't get up and go on this hike, I'm not going to see it, right? So I think becoming a deeper human being is having this mentality of like, there might be a moose out there, and have the willingness to get yourself up, do the hard things, put yourself out there, to go out into an environment that it might feel uncomfortable. You just don't know what you're going to get out there. It might be a big old failure, but like if you have that mentality, there might be a moose,
right?
Then that puts you on a trajectory of becoming a deeper human being. And the thing is she didn't go out there for a hike alone, right? We do it with other people, right? I mean, I think another thing, there's a guy named Marty Neumeyer, who has kind of a similar comment. He's like, the vision reality gap, there'd be dragons in the vision reality gap, right? You think about the old maps and they drew dragons, right? Like we don't know what's out there, right?
Yep.
So in the vision reality gap, there'd be dragons, and the truly creative people are the ones who are irresistibly drawn to do battle with those dragons. So be irresistibly drawn to go see that moose.
What I do,
Like,
we talked about that notion of, well, adventuring, and we'll talk a little bit about I call them rangers. You have a much more like a Beowulf-esque word, but that notion of like going out and exploring the unknown, but coming back to your community or doing it with community is a very interesting thing. This is a perfect example of that, right? How does like in the whole, like, I'll put it in the love category, does the collaboration element, is it a hack? Is it more of like something you figured out, oh, I can rely on other people? Or is it simply the fact of like, that's just where you became really comfortable in like articulating ideas? And I've watched you teach before, and you have this really interesting dynamic that you can kind of like, you'll pose a couple of questions and then you'll watch the groundswell of it come up and then you start to like organize it. Where did that all kind of come from in your more collaborative like work approach? Because I feel like I'm such an isolationist in some weird way. I mean, Jeff knows this about me. He's in the audience. I'm a fairly individualized, like, but I do every once in a while I realize how hard it can be to do things on your own. But once you have that bigger group to go and like depend on or just give you momentum in some way.
yeah.
Where did that come from? Was it from agency work? Was it from, hey, I mean, your family is probably a good example of that too.
Yeah, I think some of it came from agency work. I think it came from just like my professional journey and being in a lot of environments where organizations, like, they're really siloed, right? And any company that says we're highly collaborative, I think
It's a
most of the time that's BS, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I think it's kind of aspirational. Like, there's a sense of like we want to be collaborative, but it's hard. It's hard to be collaborative, and yeah, you have a lot of different personalities, right? Some people are just like, let me just work alone,
Yeah.
right? Other people are like, man, I just want to be in a room with a bunch of people on a whiteboard. Let's go to town and have a good old time. So you bring different human beings together, and it can be hard to collaborate. But my experiences were like, more often than not, there were all those silos and people were separated, which was frustrating to me, right? And then I think in the agency world, an agency oftentimes hired like, to do a particular job, right? Create a brand strategy, create this campaign, create this video, whatever it might be. And you might say, hey, as we're developing this strategy, can I talk to the sales team? Can I talk to the operations team? Can I talk to the HR? And they're like, no, we didn't hire you for that. Or internally, sometimes it's like, well, we don't have the budget for that.
Right.
And for me, that's like, it feels very counterproductive to actually doing great work. So some of that was like kind of driven by that of like, look, to do truly great work, we need to be able to bring all of the different pieces together, including those that we're serving, right? The human-centered design side of things. Like, the best work is going to come out of that. And so that's just the drive for me of like, but going back to the belief, like, everyone is creative, right? And so you can talk to a finance director and they're going to of a company and they're like, I'm not creative, right? I'm like, oh, heck yeah, you are. Like, let's
They
sit
figure
down
out
at
where
the
to
table.
stash taxes and stuff, so the government, like,
Yeah, but
that's
even
creative.
even like I mean, some of the greatest ideas that I've heard from people, like whether it was in a design space or strategy, like it came from someone who
Probably
had a
not design.
different
Yeah.
title or a different discipline. But when you bring those people together to collaborate, then I think magic can come out of that. However, I think one of the challenges is that collaboration, I think as it's oftentimes done or viewed, is not particularly helpful. For example, like you like to work kind of individually and go heads down probably. Like, so if you put everyone in the room and you're like, let's throw all our ideas up here, let's just like debate them and things like that, then all of a sudden people are struggling with like, well, what's the CEO saying, right? And you start getting politics, you start getting these different pressures. The introvert in the room is like, man, this is miserable. I just want to curl up and cry, right? Like, so everyone's a little bit different. So you have to figure out how to, and this is in the work that I do with Forge, that's part of it, is kind of galvanizing a team to collaborate in a way that brings their strengths to the table. And some of that includes like, hey, you're all sitting in the same room, but you guys are all working individually. Don't talk, be quiet, don't debate, or anything like that. You're going to work individually. So there's still a collaborative and an individual component to that.
Yeah.
That I think is important to collaborating and doing great work together.
You in the lead up to the talk, you mentioned this, your whole approach being built around relationship-centered design. And I remember thinking to myself, there's this slight shift in human-centered design or user-centered design, which is probably a phrase everyone's really familiar with. Yeah. And I thought, like, that's pretty profound and egotistical of us as humans to focus on either an individual. And so talk a little bit about, because in those things, even by their words, it puts us at the center, right? Meaning like, is there any other consideration happening here? And so like getting outside of that self-importance of that phrase and you kind of moving into this world of like relationship-centered design. Is it just looking, is it really different? Is it looking at a bigger picture? Like what are some of the ways that like kind of like, you're like, no, I've really changed this, the shift I've made in this approach looks like?
Yeah, so let me just ask real quick. Who knows what human-centered design is or has a sense of what human-centered design is? Kind of getting some head nods. And you might get some different definitions, but just as a quick kind of like summary of what that would be is in any problem solving, you're keeping humans at the center of that process. And not just the people who are solving the problem, but the people that you're solving the problem for. And you're not just creating solutions for people. You're not creating a design for someone. You're not creating a website. You're not creating whatever, a product. Like you're creating with them. So it's keeping them at the center. Here's the reason I've kind of moved toward more of a relationship-centered. And I say human plus relationship-centered because when human-centered design is done well, like, yes, it puts a human at the center, but it keeps in mind all the relationships, the systems that we live within. But I think oftentimes with human-centered design, that gets kind of lost. It's like, Jay, I'm solving a problem for you, and that's all I'm thinking about.
But that could be, but again, I think this comes back to like the things that we tend to do with like titling people, and even user flows are highly like specific structures that are looking at one path because it's easy to unpack and explain.
Yeah,
right?
it's easier that way, and so the reason I'm kind of emphasizing the relationship-centered design, and some of it I probably couldn't acknowledge some of its semantics a little bit, but I think it's trying to counterbalance where I see some of the weakness in human-centered design. I oftentimes use the example, right? Like people are out hiking and they're thirsty, and so people are like, how do we help people get hydrated? Well, let's create this single-use plastic water bottle that they can buy, and they're like, sweet, I have a water bottle that I can carry with me, or go into a store and buy it at any time.
Thirst check.
Right, thirst check.
Yeah.
It delighted that person, it solved a problem, it met a need for them, but no one thought about like, well, wait, how does this impact the broader environment, right? What other impacts are there? And so I think we oftentimes lose sight of, it's like we care so much about the human being, but we don't live in a silo, and we don't live without the relationships with other people, with the world around us. So this emphasis on relationship-centered design is more my attempt that when I'm working with clients and we are co-creating solutions, even with the people who will receive that solution, is to think through, it's not just that person, but what relationships are impacted. Their relationship with themselves, their relationship with the environment, their relationship with their spouse, their children, their community. Like, we have to keep those things in mind because there may be unintended consequences when we try to solve one problem, but we might create more problems.
Well, and that comes back to that notion of, you were talking about like, hey, when I was working in previous lives, why can't I talk to sales? Why can't I talk to, and this more comprehensive look to me is what design thinking wanted to be. And then it got compartmentalized into kind of some things. And two, when you first started talking about relationship-centered design, I thought, he's talking about like people to people now. But it is even bigger than that. It's a broader look. And I think when you approach the table with that, you said it's maybe a semantics thing, but I think you're basically setting the table or asking permission to be like, this is how I will be thinking through this. And it was really interesting because like, I don't think a lot of people think beyond the user these days, because it gets back to this thing of, I've had those worlds too, where someone has said, oh, we can't talk to these other departments because it's not in our budget. And I'm also at the same time like, how can we not do that if we're really supposed to do our jobs? Do you have like an example where you're like thinking in relationship, this more of like relationship thinking approach drove you to a completely like new outcome? Was there like, because I could imagine in that world that there might even be a business opportunity, right? Like, using your water bottle example, like we could create a whole industry around recycling bottles or turning them into AstroTurf for running or something like that, right? Have you had an example of that like in your life where you're like, okay, cool, I'm starting to see now when I really pushed on this and we looked beyond the problem that gets put on the table, Was there ever like a business outcome that you're like, we didn't know that was coming? This is the exploring like moose. This is moose, right? You know?
Yeah. That's a good question. All right, here's the first story that comes to mind. Maybe something else will come up. But so I mentioned that I was a photographer and filmmaker.
Yeah.
And this was actually another kind of formative experience for me that kind of led to a lot of the work that I do today. But in 2010, at about 7:08 p.m., a massive earthquake hit Haiti. I don't know if you remember that. And just kind of unspeakable destruction, loss of life. And so there was an organization that asked me to join them, and they did work in Haiti. And so they asked me to join them just to, as they were going to go down to some of the areas that they worked in, and through photography, through film, just help tell the stories. I was like, yeah, I'd love to. Let's do that. So we went there, and they were taking us, like the person, our main point of contact on the ground would take us to different places. We went to an orphanage. We went to different neighborhoods. Went to a church. We went to a hospital. And this hospital, when we got there, you could see the crack like running along the base of the hospital building. So you knew like the foundation was
Smoked.
It was smoked, right? So they had built a big tent, and they'd moved all the patients into that room. And so the director of the organization that I was working with kind of grabbed me. He's like, Shun-Luoi, come with me. Let's go into this tent. We're going to talk to some people, take some photos, et cetera. Right off the bat, I felt like, oh, this feels a little weird, but okay, I have a job to do. So I go in. I'm taking pictures. And after a few minutes, a nurse walked up to me, and he looked me right in the eye. And I'll never forget this experience where he said, I don't mind if you take photographs of these people, but at least ask their permission first. And like, to me, that was, it was a bit heartbreaking, because I was like, oh man, I just failed big time, where I made it so much about the story, the product for this organization, which ultimately is going to get shipped off to America, help with fundraising and things like that, that I completely lost sight of the relationship that I had with these people, the organization had with them, that like shifted how I thought about how I told stories. No longer from a sometimes utilitarian perspective, but that as I started to tell stories, create stories, that it was with this belief that the power of that story is powerful for the storyteller in changing their life and helping them flourish. And so that shifted as I continued my work as a photographer and filmmaker, of the way that I approached people to tell stories. It became much more collaborative. It became much more like, let's tell your story together, and it's your story, and making it their own. So that for me was, I don't know if that's answering the question.
But it's formative in the way that it forced a new outcome, because it changed the way you like looked at it. Because somebody made you go look further out, right?
Yeah.
Because they snapped you into that. Hey, consider this next time.
Yep. And so it pushed me into a space of like kind of collaborating, co-creating storytelling with the people whose stories I was going to tell.
Yeah, because I can see that in working its way in the way that you've explained you work with clients these days. Do you look at an event like that in your history as a failure, or do you see it as like, do you brush it off? Like, you might feel bad in the moment, but like some people can really dwell on failure, and then they're like, I'm never doing this again. Like, that's a phenomenon that I've seen that's really weird. As a kid who grew up skateboarding, I'm just like, failure isn't anything. You just get up and go again, right? But like the notion of looking at those elements, was that one of the first times that you were ever like that was, I felt bad about what happened, but I learned a lot from it? Or do you look at it as like, do you hold it today as like, I fucked up? Or is it a little of both?
It's a little of both.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the kind of person that my personality is when I fail, like I learn from it, and I just kind of brush myself off. And, it's like, what does Batman's dad say to him? Like, what happens when you fall, right? You learn to get back up again, right? So it's like when I fail, it's like I always try to learn from that. Like, what happened here? How can I learn and grow? How can this contribute to my formation? Whether it's a success or a failure or something in between. Like, that's, I don't necessarily hold on to it in a negative way.
I'm going to probably screw up the words, but when we were talking the lead up to this, you believe that there's these, I'm going to use my words, there's these two opposing forces. There's the building and constructive and deconstructive. What were you talking about? Like this notion of like everything you do has this push-pull in it. And there was
like the formation side.
Formation
of
stuff,
things?
yeah.
Okay, so the
forming or deforming.
the forming
There
and
we go.
deforming.
That's your
So,
better
like,
words.
So it is just one of the things I nerd out on a little bit of just thinking about like human formation. And I think in our culture, like we live in a very individualistic, self-help, right? And so, but we oftentimes kind of put things into like certain lanes of like physically, like becoming a great athlete or becoming more mentally resilient or emotionally like, but those together kind of make up the whole of who we are, our mental, our emotional, our spiritual, our physical, our relational. So those all fit and contribute to our human formation. And my thinking is like, and what you're referring to is like we're always being formed or we're being deformed. There's no true like static, like this is a neutral thing. So yeah, when I fail, like that's a part of my formation.
But I think a lot of people, that's what I was going to say, is a lot of people might see failure as deforming, right? It's a minus in the equation, if you will. And that's what's fascinating to me because I think even in my teaching methodology is very often I show students where I screwed up in multiple times leading up to something. And so when I try and articulate a skill or a process or even a thought, it's usually based in some sort of multiple, some people would see it as deforming, but I've actually thought they're the most formative things in the world, some of those experiences where the outcome wasn't necessarily positive or the best. And you're like, but it made me better.
I actually, now my personality is like I reframe I reframe the heck out of things. If something's bad, I make it a positive.
You're in politics now?
What's that?
Are you in politics now?
Yeah, maybe I should be. No, thank you. No desire on that one. But so I can reframe things of like if something's kind of negative. But I'm a big believer of like, I say that because that could be a bad thing, where it's like sometimes you need to lean into the hard, the brokenness, the pain. But I'm a believer like some of the most beautiful things come out of brokenness, right? And sometimes you can use the kind of the pictures of like, hey, you want to get stronger, you have to tear down your muscles and allow them to grow back, right? When a woman's giving birth, that's painful, right? And I can't really talk, right? My wife could tell you like, but beauty comes out of that. And so I think that the things when we look back on our lives, some of the most beautiful, redemptive, grace-filled things are going to come through those things that had pain and brokenness. But I think sometimes it's how we respond to that, how we grow from that, how we think about it. And I think to the extent that we lean into that. I think I've missed out on like really cool formative parts of my life because I was trying to avoid it. I just reframed it versus leaning into the pain and allowing kind of grace to flow through that. So, but yeah, failure, brokenness, man, some of the best stuff comes out of that. And so it shouldn't be ignored. It shouldn't be dismissed. It should be embraced.
Okay, we're gonna mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So fun time. Just choose some scenario thing that I do here. So I'm gonna give you 10 questions for you. You're gonna kind of like, we're just gonna see where we go with them. Okay. So first one, push or pull?
What do you mean by that?
You tell me.
I tell you. Push.
I was gonna say, if I had to answer these for you, it's like dating game, you know?
Yeah.
Tactical or intuitive?
Intuitive. Yeah.
Stillness or momentum?
I'm going to say stillness, but sometimes I feel like there's these seasons, like other times. You talk about all the projects I do. I'm like, man, I just need momentum. Let's keep these things moving.
Yeah.
I'm in a season right now where I've been trying to take more time to just be still, and I've been reading more about like some of the creative geniuses in history and the things that they did. Like they'd spend hours just sitting there, doing nothing.
Yeah.
Think whatever, and they would point to that as some of their greatest creative output became because they just learned to be still. So I'm like trying to pursue that a little bit more.
It's interesting you bring that up because I do think in I used to believe the more things I was working on, the more they would all inform each other and create this like momentum, energy combination thing. Yeah. But I'm starting to realize there is a beauty in, and I'm not starting to realize it. I've known it's there for a while. I just don't have the capacity sometimes to like soak in it. But man, it's cool when you have that opportunity to be like, I'm just gonna listen and sit for a second with this and see what it does, versus we're so programmed to be just super reactionary.
It is really hard. I put on my calendar every day, I have an hour block, and I write TRW, I think, read, write. And it's just like, that's my hour to do that. But don't ask me how often I actually
You
do
get
that.
to do it.
Right?
But,
I get, my life gets fragmented.
but that's the creative practice, right? You set up the structure to at least try and accommodate it too. I think I know the answer to this one. Sparring or soloing? Soloing.
Oh, sparring, yeah, all the way.
Form or function?
Form.
I for sure thought you were going to be a function dude.
Why is
Really?
that?
You're so thoughtful about the way that things work. And so I almost like, and I was giving you props because I saw one of your decks, and I'm like, dude, did you design these charts? Because they're very well formed. They're beautiful. Like, and I was like, oh, he's just gonna have like a screen grab out of like Excel or something, and they were like really considered. So maybe that answers the question. But I thought you would be more of a function guy.
I mean, it's, like a lot of these, it's a little bit of both.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yes is a fine answer to some of these too, by the way. Listen first or speak first?
Listen first. Yeah.
Is that a newer thought in your process? I mentioned being in your kid growing, as a kid growing up. Is this current Shun-Luoi, or is this?
No, I think it's always been, some of it was out of a place of that shyness that I was talking about when I was younger. But I think over time, just again, listen, learn, love, like of the power of listening. I remember one time I lived in San Francisco, and I was just like, I love to hang out on the streets, like I'd hang out with the homeless people and just like get to know them and things like that. I remember I was in the stairwell to a BART station, and a guy was just hanging out. So we just started talking. And this guy was a talker. I mean, he talked for like 30 to 45 minutes. And I just sat and listened. But at the end of that, he's like, man, I want to hear your story. You sat and listened to mine. Like, I want to hear yours. So I think listening first actually opens the door for me to be able to speak.
Yeah. Especially in that scenario, those people often feel so invisible.
Yeah.
Too, right? And everyone wants to be heard.
But everyone does.
Yeah.
Whether it's someone who's homeless, going through all different kinds of challenges, but to all of us in this room.
Yeah.
We all want to be heard.
Yeah, everybody.
And when we're too busy talking at them, then we lose, not only do we lose the opportunity to listen, but I think we lose the trust to listen. So.
And this one's purposely going to mess you up.
Oh, all right.
System
Bring
or
it on.
story?
System or story?
And this came out of like something that we were talking about, and even now I didn't know about your film background.
Yeah.
But like I see the way you see narrative. I can kind of understand now.
Honestly, I'm struggling a little bit because system takes my brains a number of different ways of like what we're talking about when we say system.
System or story, for me, the reason I pulled that one together for you in particular is because like as you build brands, right, we need structure, and as you've coded in your background and things like that. And in some weird way, I think systems can be stories. And this, I just wanted to see what you would do with it, because I was figuring that you were going to like kung fu me in a way that it was going to be like, oh yeah, of course he gets like, but I know you're such a storyteller, but that's like the easy answer too. Yeah. And I think a modern version of that, I'm just curious where you kind of like would lie when you're helping someone build a brand narrative. Do you look at it more like a story, or are you like, it's a system, or is it,
I'm going to say yes on this one, but there's an aspect of story that can be on the surface so messy, but I think the best stories have an underlying system. Whether it's a brand story, whether it's you're writing a book, a movie. I mean, you look at any of the great movies that are out there, like there's a structure and a system to that story. So yeah, I'm going to say yes, but I probably lean more towards system, because I think that system actually leads to some of the most powerful stories.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is if we were talking about making an art film, it might be more story. But when you're talking about building brands, at the end of the day, I don't care what the brand is, it's a utility. The story is there to serve the comms in any million ways out. And so to me, I look at it as a lot of times as like system.
I don't know if I agree with you on that one, but you want to spar? Are we ready to go?
No, but I mean, it was funny because as I was thinking about that, you do have this like And it could also be the season. Like I like that you're using that word.
Yeah.
Where it goes. Moonshot or micro step?
Micro step. I would have in the past, and my tendency is to think in terms of moonshot. But but every moonshot has micro steps that get there.
Right.
And I always tell people like, don't. And I say this, I preach this to myself, like, don't despise the small beginnings, right? Because all the greatest moonshots had those small beginnings. So those micro steps are what will get you to the moonshots.
Well, and this is the reason I thought this one was such an interesting place to be was we hear about all the big the Musk things that are going on, all this, and it's always these like far-fetched kind of things. But if I look at the successes of at least the clients I've worked with, it's these like marginal moves that like made the gains over time. They're just not that easy for me, at least, like on a Friday to go, what did I do this week? We relaunched, whatever it is. So,
well, and I think there's like,
we're taught in a way to like only honor moonshots. I feel like a lot of people, that's the only thing they talk about.
That's the only thing they talk about. But I think even across like, you kind of name your category. It could be like what you're talking about, like for a business in a business context and helping them solve some problem or create a product or whatever. Like my experience is like the richest parts of those engagements are those little micro steps that are taken, and going back to the relationship aspect, like that's what people remember.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of disagree a little bit about the brand being utilitarian, because I think that there's a richness in that creates memories for people as they interact with the brand, as they interact with each other. That it's those little micro moments, micro steps that actually are some of the most powerful parts of it. Like the moonshot is people will look at that and they'll point to that, but they don't get to see all those little micro.
I think micro steps have more of an opportunity for stillness too. Whereas, like if you're on the hustle to a moonshot, it's all acceleration, really.
It's all acceleration. And I think the thing about when we go for moonshot is that the reality is like most of the time, what the moonshot ends up being is way different than what you thought it was.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take those micro steps, like then it's actually probably going to get you to the right moonshot than what you might have thought at the beginning.
Empathy or efficiency?
Empathy.
Last one. Why or what if?
Why?
Very design
And
centric.
I want to say yes on that one.
Well, it was funny because like I think we had this discussion about saying no. Like I rarely will say no to people, but I often say, but what about? Yeah. And so there's the what if and why thing is a little bit related, because I think it's very easy to just keep asking the why question. Almost sounds like one of those little kids that, why is the sky blue? What you just keep going on and giving them answers.
Yeah.
But you're like, what if starts to present the notion of solutions, and that can build momentum. And I see like you do a lot of that kind of like in your work. I see you do a lot of that. You almost like culture it out of people. And that's part of the role of like you being a sparring partner, is to be, okay, cool, I understand that. Even you challenged me on system, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the sparring partner mindset. Why do you think being challenged or challenging other people's ideas is so vital in like the creative world, even in the business world today? It gets out of creative pretty fast, right?
Yep.
How your clients would probably see it. But like, why is it vital? I don't feel like we do it enough, for one.
We don't do it enough, and there's, I think, a variety of reasons for that. But I think as human beings, we're far too comfortable with the status quo. And I'm just as, susceptible to that as well. I get comfortable. I get kind of like, I don't ask why enough. And so it's just like, that's just the way it is. And so I think that comfort level with the status quo, like any great innovations that have ever been done out there, any great creative output that any of you ever done is like, it's because you weren't comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah.
Like even if it was in a small way, that micro step, you pushed yourself a little bit beyond. And so, but because that's a tendency for us, and in our individualistic culture, we can get siloed within ourselves. That, again, going back to the boxer, metaphor of like the greatest boxers had people
that were just as good as them.
Who was just as good as them. Yeah, or
Yeah.
almost as good as that, but help them become the best version of themselves. And so the bottom line is like, if you guys want to be great designers, great creators, great strategists, like put your label on there, great, like You cannot do it alone. And the greatest work that you do is going to come because you had people in your life that pushed you, challenged you, sparred with you.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why I go to the why versus the what if, because when I keep asking, if I keep saying why, you're going to discover the what if.
Right, because it's pushing.
Yeah, because I'm pushing you versus me saying, well, hey, what if you did this, right? And there's always a little bit of both within a sparring relationship. But yeah.
Do you feel like with like, everything's an echo chamber, seems like these days. Whatever news resource you digest, all of it, it's kind of telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And I feel like that some business leaders and brand builders, marketers, things that I've had interactions with, they don't get challenged a lot on their ideas. And I shouldn't say that's probably a way overgeneralization. But the notion of like, would everything be better if there was more sparring happening? And like I often wonder that, like, using the critique thing we talked about earlier, people aren't putting work up on a wall and saying, tell me what you think about this.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to think about that is it is not to, and I was trying to say this, maybe I didn't say it very clearly, but like the notion of critique isn't just to bash work. It's for the opportunity of the person presenting the work to answer some of the questions of why you did what you did.
Yeah.
And I think that's your value that you bring to your clients when you start to push them. Because you have CEOs, I'm going to use a CEO or a CMO, some senior executive you're probably having a direct relationship with. Your role is to show up and be like, hey, Steve, I think that job, that's probably not fully thought out. Or what does that look like when you challenge them on an idea? Because we do live in this era of, I'm the CEO and I'm just going to roll in with all these ideas, but you're going to challenge them on it. What's that look like? Is it literally like, okay, cool, I hear what you're saying. Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Does it get argumentative too?
It can.
Does it get heated?
It can, absolutely. And in fact, it should get heated.
Yeah.
Right? Because
there's a passion to it.
There's a passion. It feels personal. I like to tell clients, half jokingly, but it's really true, actually. It just makes them laugh. But I'm like, man, I cannot wait for our first major fight. And they laugh, but I'm actually serious because if you have a fight because you're like, man, your personality just bugs the heck out of me, right? Like, well, okay, that's probably not a very healthy fight. But when it's ideological in nature of like, we're both committed to doing such great work as two human beings with our own stories and personalities and perspectives, you're gonna have fights. And if you don't, that means you're just playing it safe, right? And you're not pushing past the status quo. So what it looks like is, it kind of depends on the person. Yeah. But again, it goes back to like, I take a lot of time to listen and ask questions, to probe, to get them to see what does that unearth. And then, but there has to be a balance there. It's like, if I only sit there and ask questions, like everyone also craves maybe some guidance and some like, Shun-Luoi, what do you think, right? And so, I'll give that to them as well.
That takes a fairly egoless mindset too, right? Like, hey, I want people to validate this versus the insecurity that we can have of like, I'm presenting this idea.
Yeah.
A lot of times that's grounded and I'm like, I think this will work. So let's just go with it. But then once it gets tested or challenged, it could prove it out. And that's terrifying, I think, to some people.
It's terrifying. And I do think that there's, Phil Jackson wrote a book, and in his book, he was the coach of the Bulls and the Lakers, right? Like NBA coach, where he talks about you have to put your ego on the bench, bench your ego, right? And I think that's really true. That's where I think a lot of kind of unhealthy conflict can happen, is just because we're too busy like holding on to our own ego, rather than mutually being committed to doing great work, and then fighting over that.
Right. Yeah. I had a creative partner who used to call it, he said that friction makes heat and heat makes fire. So the notion of, we would like, it was fairly good natured, but every once in a while we'd be like, no, like it would get very tense. So like, do you have any stories like where the tension kind of like, okay, we're getting to a building point where, whether it's heated or passionate, but like, do you have any examples of where like the tension did lead to like some sort of like transformation? Even maybe in even agency life too. Cause like I do remember, you talking about a little bit about that background of you just thought differently. Even if you're in an organization that might have its own, like, this is the way we do it.
Yeah.
I believe there was probably the Shun-Luoi way we're going to do it too, happening in there. But like any
Yeah.
moment that, and it could be micro too, right? Like, do you have an example of, you're like, okay, I'm going to push on this till I get a yield of some sort?
Yeah, there was, I worked at an agency. Actually, this was not my finest moment. So this is actually not a great example of here's how to do it really
Right.
well. But it had been kind of like
Building.
building the tension and kind of pushing and pulling against each other. And it did kind of blow up. And I may have used some words I should not have used in that kind of context.
Yes.
Right. And I did. I lost my temper and I blew up. But the reason I bring that as a story is like, there's still trust there. There was trust, right?
Yeah.
And so when there's trust, there can be some grace. And so, yep, we met afterward. We sat down in the office, kind of, calmed down, and we came back together and talked it through. But that ultimately led to better communication, better dialogue, better relationship, better trust.
Yeah.
There were still some things, but there was also some broken trust because of how I responded. So it's like it can get messy there. Even me as a sparring partner, right? I'm sure there are times when two boxers got really mad at each other, right? So it can get messy, but I think when you have that underlying commitment to each other and the ideas and the work that's being done, you can work your way through those.
Well, and I do
moments.
think, that I don't know if the era still exists anymore, but I remember people in agencies I've worked at, and even myself, literally fighting for the idea that I knew was right. And I would say I'm guilty of probably not doing that as much these days, because like I think people are afraid of the conflict or the tension, but there is a strength or trust that does get built in kind of a unique way out of that.
But that goes back to like, I think when you do things from a human-centered and a relationship-centered kind of approach where you're co-creating together, you're collaborating together, you build trust in the process versus oftentimes like with traditional agencies, right? You get a brief and you go back to your office and you work on it individually or as a team, and then you bring it to the client. Like, I think there's things that are lost in that process, in the relationship and the ability to come together and align toward the greatest work. So I think when you are collaborating well together, then you can go through those fights, you can go through the tension, but everyone kind of aligns together around that work in real time, which I think can be helpful.
Well, you know this, me and you, we get on phone calls for an hour and they end up being like 2 hours.
Are we running out of time?
No, but I want to know that, say thank you for that, by the way. You are amazing. I love the shares.